So I just wanted to welcome everyone to this hearing today. We'll be talking about election administration funding, very, very important issue. And we've got a pretty strong group of speakers who are going to be talking to us about some of the challenges that we face in this area. Literally, the meeting we just saw coming out has to do with the budget, and hopefully this will be an area that we're going to be able to prioritize this year. So let me just start by saying that everyone should be aware that the meeting is being streamed live on the internet, and it can be accessed through the committee homepage. And certainly if there are members of the public who would like to testify following our scheduled witnesses, please see one of the Senate sergeants, and we'll have a sign-in sheet. So we're meeting today to explore and discuss how we pay for elections in California, especially as it results to the equipment that's used to cast ballots and perform other duties necessary to administer elections. The equipment currently used in California is often described as rapidly aging and dependent on outdated technology. We're going to hear from experts regarding the extent and ramifications of this challenge and explore options for mitigation. Now, as many of you know, this situation is not unique to California. Many states and counties across the country bought new voting equipment over a decade ago with money that was provided by the federal government through the Help America Vote Act. But as we saw in this 2015 study from the Brennan Center titled America's Voting Machines at Risk, the study found that nearly every state, including California, is using some machines that are no longer manufactured, and many elections officials struggle to find replacement parts. Nice to see you, Mr. Senator. Furthermore, these older machines can also have serious security and reliability flaws that could lead to failures and crashes. Simply put, we can't afford to wait for some county to have an equipment meltdown to address this problem. And as we start to look at our system, I think we're very fearful that something like that might happen. The Secretary of State's office estimates that the price of replacing existing voting systems in all of our counties is approximately $450 million. That estimate would not only include replacement of systems on which voters actually cast ballots, but other equipment as well that is necessary for processing, tabulation, mailing, and equipment not yet commonly in use, such as ballot-on-demand printing systems and electronic poll books. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, okay, how do we pay for this very necessary investment? I believe the state really should bear most, if not all, of those costs, whether that means another bond measure similar to Proposition 41 or a direct budget appropriation in the general fund. But as many of you know all too well, since the passage of Prop 41 in 2002, the state's really had a poor record when it comes to funding elections. Not only have we stopped reimbursing counties for the cost of special elections to fill legislative and congressional vacancies, we've also failed to reimburse counties for several other state-mandated elections programs. The largest of these unfunded mandates are for changes in the law permitting any voter to request a vote-by-mail ballot or to be designated as a permanent vote-by-mail voter. And while it's vital that we find money to fund these needs, it's just as important to discuss changes that could help reduce the cost of administering elections. And one of the possibilities that, of course, we're talking about a great deal is permitting California counties to use a Colorado-style vote center model for conducting elections as proposed by my SB 450, which is jointly authored by my committee colleague, Bob Hertzberg, who will hopefully be here soon. SB 450 is currently pending in the Assembly Elections and Redistricting Committee, and while it may require an initial investment in terms of new types of equipment, it's been shown to result in significant long-term savings. And of course, the Secretary has played a leadership role with that bill as well. So I'm anxious to start this vital discussion with our witnesses. I first like to turn the microphone over to our Vice Chair, who might want to make some opening comments.
I concur with the chair. I think that as we're moving forward, there's nothing that's more important to our democracy than to pay for these elections and make sure they're open and fair. So I'm very eager to hear what the Secretary of State has to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chairman. And we'll next hear from our Honorable Secretary of State, Alex Padilla. Welcome to the committee, and thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members.
And I appreciate you bringing an apple to the...
Yeah, it's like an apple for the teacher.
Yeah, no, it's it. It's good.
Thank you for the opportunity to present and share with all of you today, because this hearing is not just important, it's also very timely. I hope that you had a chance to notice an op-ed that ran over this last weekend that I jointly authored with Neil Kelly, who will be testifying today. He's a registrar of voters for Orange County, but also serves as the president of the California Association of Clerks and Elections Officials. And we try to highlight some important items to consider in that op-ed. Among others, the fact that voting equipment in each and every one of the 58 counties in California is nearing the end of its life expectancy. And while county elections officials, as well as our office, works tirelessly through maintenance of these aging voting systems to ensure that we minimize the risks of any election year disasters, we know that we are quickly approaching a time frame of urgency to fund new voting equipment. And the best example I can point to make the point is the 2000 presidential elections. Most of us remember Florida that year, butterfly ballots, hanging chads, and many experts point to the aging voting systems of Florida as responsible for the crisis that triggered the U.S. court's intervention in the determination of who won the presidential election. In response to that experience, Congress actually acted in a bipartisan manner when they passed the Help America Vote Act, which we refer to as HAVA, which, among other things, provided for funding to modernize voting systems throughout the country, including $195 million to California specifically. The California legislature, led by then Speaker Bob Hertzberg, as well as Governor Davis, placed Proposition 41 on the ballot, which allocated an additional $195 million for new voting equipment. So that by 2005, almost all of our counties had purchased the equipment that is still in use today. And those that have equipment that's not in use today had some certification issues on security and integrity of the equipment. But the bottom line is this. It's important to remember that even though there's relatively new equipment that's in use that was purchased in 2005, more than a decade ago, the systems that were purchased were designed and developed much earlier than that. 2002, late 1990s, that's the era of technology that we're using today for voting. In 2002, that's 5 years before the first iPhone. In 2002, dial-up internet was the most popular option for going online. In 2002, you talk to people about a cloud, and it was really a reference to the weather forecast. So here we are today, 13 years after HAVA and Proposition 41. The systems in use were purchased with the HAVA funds, and Prop 41 funds are outdated, and they certainly need to be replaced. And I know you can't just take my word for it, so let me reference a couple of other entities that I think are worthy of note. The President's Commission on Election Administration issued a bipartisan report with unanimous recommendations in January of 2014, which characterized the seriousness of the situation. And I'll quote, "Perhaps the most dire warning the Commission heard in its investigation concerned the impending crisis in voting technology. Well known to election administrators, if not the public at large, this impending crisis arises from the widespread wearing out of voting machines purchased a decade ago." That's one source. Another source, in September of 2015, New York University's Brennan Center for Justice also issued a report titled "America's Voting Machines at Risk," in which they raised several concerns, including but not limited to, number one, the failure of equipment to work as intended. Number two, the inability to connect voting machines to current computers because the software is unsupported and outdated. And three, difficulty in finding replacement parts for machines that are no longer manufactured. This report also points out that many voting systems rely on software that is out of date, making it impossible, not just difficult, impossible to find hardware that is compatible with our aging operating systems. New elections equipment is an undeniable priority. And it goes without saying that elections are a government expense and that this expense must be funded. I believe the best path forward is for our state, in partnership with each of the 58 counties, work together to craft a funding solution. With Congress stuck in partisan gridlock, California is on its own. We must commit to a plan and provide ongoing funding to ensure that our elections are reliable, secure, and that every vote is counted and every ballot accounted for. California voters require it, and our democracy demands it. Now, our office estimates that to replace every county's voting system would cost upwards of $450 million. That's a necessary investment. But I think it would be smart to take advantage of the opportunity not only to modernize voting equipment, but frankly, modernize how we conduct elections. While our voting equipment is over a decade old, how we run elections is decades older. So let's not just invest in a brand new iPhone 1, let's invest in today's technology and in the future. We can invest in technology that will help make elections actually more user-friendly. Technology exists today that gives voters choices of when, where, and how to cast a ballot. We can use the latest technology to also improve language access and ensure translated materials and assistance is available at every voting location and not just the minimum required locations based on the Voting Rights Act. Technology is also available to ensure that voters with disabilities can vote privately and independently. Not only can we increase access with new investment, but we can actually make elections administration more efficient. As Chairman Allen knows, I've had the pleasure of visiting Denver, Colorado twice last year to observe their full implementation of a series of election policy reforms and technologies. In past hearings of this committee, we've discussed what we can do to increase voter participation. But I also want to highlight additional benefits of the new election technologies that Colorado adopted. Colorado uses electronic poll books and ballot on demand to not only allow voters to vote in any location within their county, but to use same-day registration at any location in their county. In the year 2014, Colorado saw 43,000 citizens registered to vote after what would have been our deadline. They made up a 1% increase in total registration in those last 2 weeks. An additional 93,000 voters updated their address, representing about 2.5% of registered voters. If we saw those numbers in California, just the basic apple-to-apple of percentages, we would have added 200,000 new voters to the rolls after the deadline that we have today. And an additional 430,000 voters update their registration information. And in addition to making the voting experience more user-friendly, Denver, Colorado has seen a 30% reduction in the cost of administering elections. And while I'm not a fan of just using reforms for the cost of saving money, for me, democracy and participation is first and foremost. These reforms have shown an increase in turnout and experiencing cost savings. That's a pretty good win-win, if you ask me. A big chunk of those savings is simply from reducing the use of provisional ballots, which, as we know, require additional staff time and resources to process. In Colorado's 2012 general election, at the beginning of the reform implementation, 2.5% of all ballots cast statewide were provisional ballots. In 2014, after deploying new policies and technology, 0.04% of all ballots cast were provisionals. In California in 2012, over 1 million provisional ballots were cast, representing 8.1% of all ballots. Not only thinking of the time, the energy, the resources necessary to process that number of ballots. But think about the million California voters who walked out of their polling place not knowing if their vote would count. So I suggest we invest in new technology, not just because it is a necessity, as I laid out in the beginning of my presentation, but because we can actually improve the voter experience for all Californians in the process. And I want to conclude with what I believe is an exciting update. As of yesterday, VoteCal, our new statewide centralized voter registration database, has been deployed in all 58 counties. VoteCal will be the foundation for deploying both existing policy changes like the same-day registration, but also proposed new technologies and policies that we are discussing here today. We're on track to make VoteCal the system of record by the end of June, and I thank you very much for your time and this opportunity today.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So help dramatize the problem here. I mean, what is a realistic danger that we face in terms of the current state of equipment and other election-related functions? I mean, do you think how serious is? Give us an illustrative example of what can happen if we don't follow your lead and make these important investments.
I'll give you a couple of examples that come to mind, and we'll defer to the registrars that are on the agenda for today to give you further and maybe more detailed examples. You know, when we talk about voting systems, ballot marking devices, for example, that may not record the ballot as the voter is intending to mark their ballot, you know, maybe voting for a different candidate or something. Or not properly marking the ballot, and so therefore it doesn't get counted. That's a very real concern. You know, number one. Number two, you know, most people think voting systems, well, that's just whatever I as a voter have in front of me when I'm in the booth in the polling place on election day. It's not. The voting systems is much more comprehensive than that. It's, you know, what's producing the ballots, how we're delivering ballots, how we're marking ballots, how we're casting ballots, how we're counting ballots. When some of that technology is no longer supported from the original vendors, whether it's a hardware issue or a software issue, when we can't find replacement parts, you know, you can't maintain the equipment. You know, and I've seen in county after county where they're taking some small amount of equipment and kind of cannibalizing it for replacement parts to try to maintain old but still standing part. Eventually, you know, that's no longer an option. And that's a very real example of something that's happening in far too many counties. So that could quickly lead to not having enough equipment for all the polling places that we're required to maintain under the current model.
Okay, well, scary. So tell us, so how are you thinking about the best financing option? I mean, a bond measure, a ballot a budget appropriation. I mean, tell us how you're thinking through the right approach.
According to my sources, the chairman of the Elections Committee in the State Senate is championing a line item in this year's budget for $450 million to the Secretary of State's office to work with the counties. And no, it's not true.
It sounds good to me. It sounds good to me. But
no,
I mean,
like
yeah, I know, right? This is
so here's what we're doing, you know, working in partnership with the legislature to make these budget requests and arguments to the legislature and to the governor for inclusion in this upcoming year's budget, which will be debated. We know the governor's proposed something this year. We're waiting for May revise and what revenue projections will continue to be. A ballot measure is a tool in the toolkit, but I don't think it's the preferable one because, you know, just from the financing piece of it, the cost of paying off that debt over time, you know, really balloons the dollar figure here. When we're talking about an investment of $450 million in the context of a $100 billion plus budget that's voted on every year, we think this is a prudent and necessary investment. We're working with the counties to sharpen our pencils on details such as, is it on one budget year or is it over the course of a couple of years? How much is the state going to put in for this upgraded investment versus is there a county match? Is it,
right,
you know, 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1? You know, we're running through those scenarios. But one thing is undeniable: we need a plan, a sustainable funding plan sooner rather than later.
Well, I mean, it doesn't seem like a lot, but of course, we've been struggling to get Cal Access funded, and that's what, $14 million. So, have you had? Do you feel as though the case has been made to the governor emphatically on this issue?
We've had a couple meetings with the staff on this issue already, and so we know the issue is definitely on the radar. We hope it's on the radar of the Department of Finance as well. And as of today, it's officially on the radar of the state legislature.
Right. Okay.
And so we have a work cut out for us to, not just elevate awareness, but truly understanding of the scenario. As you invite the local elections officials here in future panels, they'll tell you we'll do what it takes to get through the 2016 election cycle, but starting in 2018, depending on the county, they're not nearly as confident. And I don't want to, at the risk of kind of scaring people, oh my gosh, are we going to have a crisis like Florida 2000? Not today, but if we don't start making investments in the next generation of systems, we don't want to get to that point, number one. And number two, as I mentioned in my remarks, it's not just about buying a brand new, system that we use today of technology that was developed 15, 20 years ago. We can actually invest in systems that provide much more voter choice, flexibility, convenience, so that it's a win-win. Achieve some efficiencies and savings in the process, but really do more to increase turnout as well.
And I assume you're engaging closely with the budget chairs and legislative budget chairs and everyone else. Okay.
And vice chairs. Don't forget the vice chairs.
Don't forget the vice chairs. That's right. That's right. Now, do you have a sense of, we're working together on SB 450. Do you have a sense of how this could be a cost saver for counties and how it might be an important part of this conversation?
Right. So through Senate Bill 450, affording counties a new, more modern and user-friendly way of conducting elections, I think there's tremendous opportunities for efficiencies and cost savings. Number one, vote centers versus polling places, as we've seen them in other jurisdictions, not just Denver, but beyond. Create an incredible amount of savings because you don't have nearly the number of locations you have to secure to provide for that voting opportunity on election day, let alone the volunteers. Just the sheer number of units of equipment that you have to provide in each polling location. That reduction alone creates a tremendous amount of savings that is then reinvested in early voting and other things as called for in Senate Bill 450. I mentioned in the remarks the clear, stark example of, between same-day registration and other tools, much more accurate voting lists, including VoteCal, drastically reduces the number of provisional ballots that are cast. So it's more confidence on behalf of the voter that their vote means something, but also much freed up staff time and resources when the counties are counting ballots and doing what they need to do to reach the point of certifying the election results.
Right. Yep. Okay. Other members of the committee have questions for this?
By the way, let alone a lot of saved money from return ballots that went to the wrong address when our voter lists are cleaned up.
Sure. Are we, and we're now sort of in a much better, we're now there. I mean, we're because of VoteCal?
We're just about there. So
just about
58
there.
counties have migrated from their legacy systems onto VoteCal. And so between now and mid to late June, it's all the internal, we're making sure there's no inadvertent bugs that we didn't recognize along the way. There's a mock election different than the high school mock elections that'll happen closer to November, just to kind of test drive the system, if you will, before we make it the official system of record. But, so far, knock on wood, we're on track.
Well, congratulations for that. I mean, I know I think we're the only state. We were. This was part of our non-compliance with Help of America Vote Act.
Correct.
And we're finally gonna, 15 years later, gonna be in compliance as a result. So congratulations. That's an important achievement. It's gonna help make our system work much, much better.
Thank you.
Okay, other members of the committee have any questions for the Secretary? Mr. Vice Chair, no? Yeah, any questions for the Secretary or no?
Not at this point.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much.
If I may, just in closing,
Yeah, absolutely,
the
please.
Vice Chair cares deeply about these issues. He's spoken to me in a committee context in the past, as well as privately, about how big of a believer he is in Michael Vu, the Registrar of Voters of San Diego County, who I will suggest to you has been a champion
Yes.
for some of the proposed reforms that are working their way through the legislature, and can also attest to Senator Anderson personally on the improved turnout and participation rates and cost savings to be achieved in the process.
Yes,
Thank you.
good. And he's engaging, he's active listening as we speak. Okay, so thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. I really do appreciate it. And we'll next hear from our county elections officials, who will give a great deal more color to the issues raised by our secretary to help us better understand some of the challenges on the ground. So we're going to hear first from Neil Kelly, who's from Orange County, who is our Orange County Registrar of Voters. He's also president of the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials. Jill Levine is here as well. I would love her to come up from Sacramento County, and then of course Dean Logan from LA County. So we're looking forward to hearing from these three luminaries of on-the-ground elections implementation. So we'll first turn to Mr. Kelly.